There's a specific moment that reveals everything about who you actually are, and it's not the moment when you succeed. Anyone can look strong when things are going well. Anyone can appear confident when the path is clear and the results are coming. The moment that reveals your true nature is the one right after you fail.
When the project collapses. When the relationship ends. When the business fails.
When you get rejected. When your best effort produces nothing. In that moment, when reality has just proven that your plan didn't work, that your strategy was flawed, that your best wasn't good enough, there are only two types of people. Those who interpret failure as evidence about the world, and those who interpret it as evidence about themselves. The first type looks at failure and sees information. They see a strategy that didn't work, a timing that was off, a variable they didn't account for, a skill they need to develop. They extract the lesson, adjust their approach, and move forward. The second type looks at failure and sees confirmation. Confirmation that they're not good enough. That they don't have what it takes. That success isn't meant for people like them. That trying was a mistake. And here's the brutal truth nobody wants to hear. If you're in that second category, if failure confirms your weakness instead of revealing your next move, then failure isn't just one option for you. It's your only option. Because you've built an identity that cannot survive the learning process that creates success. In 1600, Miyamoto Musashi was 17 years old and he had just won his first duel to the death. He'd killed a man named Arima Kihei, a trained samurai from a prestigious school. And everyone around Musashi expected him to celebrate, to build his reputation, to ride the momentum of that victory. But Musashi did something nobody expected. He went into the mountains alone and spent the next 3 months analyzing everything that had gone wrong during that fight. Not what went right. What went wrong. Because even though he'd won, even though he was alive and his opponent was dead, Musashi had made mistakes during that duel. His footwork had been sloppy at one point. His timing had been off. He'd relied on aggression instead of strategy. He'd won, but he'd won ugly. And what separated Musashi from every other warrior of his era was this. He treated victory the same way most people treat defeat. As evidence of weakness that needed to be eliminated. Most people celebrate victory and avoid examining it. They treat success as confirmation that they're doing everything right, that they don't need to change. And then they're shocked when that same approach fails in a different context. Musashi understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to prove. Your relationship with failure determines everything. Not your relationship with success, not your talent, not your circumstances. How you interpret failure, how you respond to it, how you extract value from it, that's the skill that separates people who eventually succeed from people who remain trapped in the same patterns forever. You're watching this video because failure is destroying you. Not the failure itself, but what you're making it mean. You tried something and it didn't work, and instead of seeing that as information about your strategy, you saw it as information about your worth. You put yourself out there and got rejected, and instead of recognizing that rejection is part of the process of finding alignment, you decided it meant you're not good enough. You committed to something and didn't follow through, and instead of examining what made follow-through difficult, you concluded that you lacked discipline or willpower or whatever character trait you think other people have that you don't. And every time you do this, every time you turn failure into evidence of inherent weakness, you're making success literally impossible. Because success requires iteration. It requires trying approaches that don't work until you find one that does. It requires exposure to rejection until you find acceptance. It requires starting things you won't finish until you learn what's worth completing. If your identity can't survive that process, if every failure confirms that you're inadequate instead of showing you what to adjust, then you're locked out of the mechanism that creates achievement. You've made failure your only option by building a self that interprets all evidence through the lens of your inadequacy. What I'm about to share with you isn't motivation. It's not going to make you feel good about your failures or tell you that everyone fails so it's okay. What I'm going to show you is the specific mechanism that Musashi used to transform failure from identity threat into tactical advantage. How he trained himself to extract value from every mistake, every defeat, every moment where reality proved his approach wrong. And more importantly, how you can rebuild your relationship with failure so it stops being something that confirms your weakness and starts being something that reveals your path forward. This is going to challenge everything you believe about self-esteem and confidence and positive thinking. Because what makes you strong isn't believing you're great. It's being able to confront evidence that you're not great in this specific area yet and using that evidence to become great. That's power. That's what separates people who achieve from people who cope. Before I show you the 3 shifts that transform failure from prison into tool, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. Because this channel isn't about making you feel better about where you are. It's about giving you the systems to get somewhere different. Smash that like button, and then drop a comment telling me this. What's a failure you experienced that you're still carrying as evidence that something's wrong with you?
You don't need to tell me the whole story.
Just write, I failed at this, and I made it mean I'm. Finish those sentences. Because that pattern, that specific way you turn external events into internal judgments, that's what we're about to dismantle. Do it now.
Make it conscious.
That's the first step to changing it. The first shift is what Musashi called separating the warrior from the battle. And this is the foundation that makes everything else possible. When most people fail, they don't separate the action from their identity. They don't say, the strategy one used didn't work.
They say, I'm not good enough.
They don't say, I didn't have the skills required for that specific challenge yet. They say, I'm incapable. They collapse the gap between what they did and who they are. And once you do that, once you make failure about identity instead of about action, you've created a situation where failure becomes existentially threatening. Where every mistake feels like proof that you're fundamentally flawed. Where you can't examine what went wrong objectively because examining it feels like examining all the ways you're inadequate. Musashi never made that mistake. When he lost a sparring match, and he lost many during his training, he didn't think, I'm a failure as a warrior. He thought, that technique doesn't work against that type of opponent, or my footwork in that situation needs refinement, or I'm still too emotionally reactive in close combat. He separated Musashi the person from Musashi the collection of techniques and strategies that could be upgraded. And that separation is what allowed him to fail forward instead of failing into paralysis. Here's what this looks like in practical terms. You launch a business and it fails. Most people's internal narrative is, I'm not cut out for entrepreneurship. I don't have what it takes. I should stick to a regular job where I can't fail this badly. That's identity failure. It's taking an outcome and making it mean something permanent about who you are. But if you separate warrior from battle, the narrative becomes, this specific business model didn't work in this market at this time with the resources I had available. What did I learn about market research, about timing, about resource management, about my own behavior under pressure? What would I do differently next time? See the difference? The second narrative keeps your identity intact while extracting maximum learning from the experience. It doesn't feel good in the moment. Learning never does. But it keeps you in the game. Or you ask someone on a date and they reject you. Identity failure says, I'm not attractive enough, interesting enough, valuable enough.
Nobody want me. This is evidence of my inadequacy.
Warrior battle separation says, that specific person wasn't interested for reasons I may or may not know. What can I learn about how I present myself, about the types of people I'm attracted to, about how I handle vulnerability?
One interpretation destroy you. The other develop you.
There's a guy named Marcus who spent 10 years trapped in the same career because he couldn't make this separation. He was a software developer who wanted to transition into product management, but every time he tried, he failed. He'd apply for product roles and get rejected. He'd pitch product ideas internally and they'd get shut down. And after each failure, his narrative was, I'm just a developer.
I'm not strategic enough. I'm not a leader.
I don't have the right mindset for product work. That identity-level interpretation made every failure feel like confirmation of a permanent inadequacy. So he stopped trying. He stayed in development for another 7 years, getting more and more resentful, feeling more and more trapped. Then he learned about Musashi's concept of separating warrior from battle, and he forced himself to rebuild his interpretation of those failures. He went back through every rejection and reframed it. Instead of, I'm not strategic enough, he wrote, I didn't demonstrate product thinking in that interview because I focused on technical details instead of user outcomes. Instead of, I'm not a leader, he wrote, I haven't yet developed the communication style that product leadership requires. Instead of, I don't have the right mindset, he wrote, I haven't practiced thinking about business metrics and market dynamics the way product managers do. Every identity judgment became an action gap. Every permanent flaw became a learnable skill. And once he made that shift, once he separated his identity from his current capabilities, he could actually work on those gaps. He practiced product thinking. He studied business metrics. He worked on his communication. And within 18 months, he'd made the transition. Not because the failures stopped, but because failure stopped meaning something about who he was and started meaning something about what he needed to learn. Here's how you implement this first shift starting right now. Take a failure you're carrying, one that you've turned into evidence about your inadequacy, and force yourself to separate identity from action. Write down what happened as objectively as possible. Just the facts. Then write down the identity judgment you made. The, I'm not enough or I don't have what it takes statement. Then rewrite that judgment as an action gap. Instead of, I'm not disciplined, write, I haven't yet built systems that make discipline automatic. Instead of, I'm not smart enough, write, I haven't yet developed the specific knowledge or skills that situation required. Instead of, I'm not the type of person who succeeds at this, write, I haven't yet figured out the approach that works for someone with my specific strengths and constraints. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't affirmations. This is accurate thinking. Because the identity version is actually false. You're not permanently inadequate. You're currently lacking specific capabilities that can be developed. Once you make that distinction clear, failure stops being a mirror that reflects your unworthiness and starts being a map that shows you what to build next. The second shift is what Musashi called treasuring failure more than success. And this is where most people's brains short-circuit because it sounds completely backward. But here's what Musashi understood that modern achievement culture misses entirely.
Success teach you almost nothing.
Success tells you that what you did worked in that specific context with those specific variables at that specific time. It doesn't tell you why it worked. It doesn't reveal your weaknesses.
It doesn't show you where you got lucky versus where you were skilled.
Success is a moment of confirmation, and confirmation is the enemy of growth. Failure, on the other hand, is pure information. Failure tells you exactly where your model of reality was wrong, where your strategy had gaps, where your skills were insufficient, where your assumptions were flawed. Failure is reality's feedback system, and if you can remove the emotional charge from it, if you can stop making it mean something about your worth, failure becomes the most valuable thing that can happen to you. Because it's showing you precisely what needs to improve. Musashi actively sought out failure. After winning duels, he would seek out stronger opponents specifically to lose to them in training. He would put himself in situations where his techniques didn't work so he could identify weaknesses. He would experiment with strategies he thought might fail just to understand why they failed. Because every failure gave him information that success never could. Success said, keep doing what you're doing. Failure said, here's exactly what's broken and needs fixing. And he understood that the warrior who treasures failure, who seeks it out and extracts everything from it, advances faster than the warrior who chases victory and avoids anything that might damage their record. This is completely opposite to how most people operate. Most people try to minimize failure. They play it safe, stick to what they know works, avoid situations where they might look bad or feel inadequate. And then they wonder why they're not growing. They wonder why people who seem less talented are passing them. It's because those people are failing more. They're exposing themselves to situations that reveal their gaps. They're iterating faster because they're not protecting a perfect record. They're building capability. Here's what this looks like in your life. You probably avoid situations where you might fail. You don't apply for jobs you're not completely qualified for. You don't start projects where success isn't guaranteed. You don't have conversations that might go badly. You don't try skills you're not already good at. And you think that's smart. You think you're protecting yourself. But what you're actually doing is protecting your current level of capability. You're ensuring that you never face challenges that would force you to grow. You're choosing comfort over information. And the cost of that choice is that you stay exactly who you are right now forever. Compare that to someone who deliberately seeks out situations slightly beyond their current capability. Who applies for stretch roles knowing they'll probably get rejected. Who starts projects knowing they'll probably fail the first few times? Who has difficult conversations knowing they'll probably handle them badly? That person is failing constantly. But they're also learning constantly. They're gathering information about what doesn't work so they can find what does. And over time, that person's capability expands dramatically while yours stays static. Not because they're more talented, but because they've made failure their teacher instead of their enemy. There's a woman named Sarah who transformed her entire creative career by implementing this shift. She was a designer who'd built a decent freelance business, but she'd plateaued. She was getting the same type of clients, doing the same type of work, making the same income year after year. And she realized why. She only took projects she knew she could execute perfectly. She only worked with clients in industries she understood. She only used techniques she'd already mastered. She had a perfect track record, and that perfect track record was keeping her trapped at her current level. Then she learned about Musashi's approach to failure and made a radical decision. She started taking one project per quarter that terrified her. Projects in industries she didn't understand. Projects that required techniques she'd never used. Projects with budgets higher than she'd ever charged. And she told the clients up front, "This is a stretch for me, I'm going to learn during this process, and I'm pricing it accordingly." Half of those projects were disasters.
She missed a deadline.
She delivered work that wasn't her best. She had to redo things multiple times. But each disaster taught her something she could never have learned from success. One failed project taught her about working with technical stakeholders. Another taught her about managing complex approval processes. Another taught her about a design tool that became core to her future work. And within 2 years, her capability had expanded so dramatically that she was working with clients and on projects that would have been impossible for the version of her that was protecting a perfect record. She'd made failure her competitive advantage. Here's how you implement this second shift. Identify one area of your life where you've been playing it safe, where you've been avoiding failure by staying within your current capability. Then deliberately expose yourself to failure in that area. Take the project you're not sure you can handle. Have the conversation you're afraid will go badly. Try the skill you've been avoiding because you're not good at it yet. And here's the critical part. Before you do it, define what you're trying to learn. Don't go in trying to succeed. Go in trying to extract information. Ask yourself, what do I want to discover about my current gaps? What would failure in this situation teach me? Then do the thing, and when it doesn't go perfectly, and it won't, immediately extract the lesson. What did that reveal about what I need to develop? What did I learn about how this type of situation works? What would I do differently next time? You're training yourself to see failure as data instead of as judgment. And once you make that shift, once failure becomes valuable instead of threatening, you'll start seeking it out instead of avoiding it. And that's when your growth rate accelerates beyond anything you've experienced before. Right here, I need to stop and make sure you're actually implementing this instead of just understanding it intellectually. Because intellectual understanding is worthless.
It's just entertainment.
What matters is changing your actual behavior in real situations. So scroll down to the comments right now and make a commitment. Write this. In the next 7 days, I'm going to deliberately expose myself to failure by, and then finish that sentence with something specific. Something that scares you because you might not succeed. Something you've been avoiding because it might not go well.
Make it public.
Make it a commitment. Say what you're going to do and what you're trying to learn from it. Because when you make failure your goal, when you reframe the entire purpose as learning instead of succeeding, you've removed the emotional charge that makes failure devastating. You've turned it into a tool. Do it now. Commit publicly. I'll see it. And more importantly, you'll see it and you'll be accountable to following through. The third shift is what Musashi called using failure as elimination. And this is the most advanced concept because it requires you to understand that failure isn't just teaching you what to add. It's teaching you what to eliminate. When something doesn't work, most people think, I need to do more, I need to try harder, I need to add more effort or more resources or more time. But Musashi's approach was the opposite. When something didn't work, he asked, what can I remove? What unnecessary element is creating drag? What assumption is wrong?
What technique is inefficacy?
He used failure as a filtering mechanism to strip away everything that wasn't essential. This is how he went from being a good swordsman to being the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. Not by adding more techniques, but by eliminating every technique that wasn't absolutely necessary. By removing every movement that didn't contribute to winning. By cutting away every assumption that reality had proven false. Failure was his refinement process. Every time something didn't work, he got simpler, more direct, more essential. While other warriors were adding complex techniques and elaborate strategies, Musashi was reducing his approach down to pure effectiveness. Here's how this applies to your life right now. You've probably been approaching your failures by adding. The business failed, so you think you need more marketing, more funding, more products, more features. The relationship failed, so you think you need to be more interesting, more available, more accommodating. The project failed, so you think you need more time, more help, more planning. But what if the failure is telling you to subtract instead? What if you failed because you had too many objectives instead of too few? Because you were trying to serve too many audiences instead of one specific audience perfectly? Because you were using too many strategies instead of executing one strategy with precision? Because you were maintaining too many relationships instead of deepening the few that mattered? Failure as elimination means using every failed attempt to simplify your approach. To identify what's not working and remove it completely rather than trying to fix it or work around it. This is counterintuitive because our instinct when something fails is to add more effort. But often what's needed is less effort directed more precisely. Musashi's most famous duel illustrates this perfectly. When he fought Sasaki Kojiro, he didn't use elaborate techniques. He didn't employ complex strategies. He eliminated everything except the essential elements.
One wooden sword.
One strike.
Perfect timing.
He'd spent decades eliminating every unnecessary element until what remained was so simple and so effective that it was unstoppable. That's what failure as elimination creates. Not complexity, but devastating simplicity. And you can apply this same principle to anything you're struggling with. Every failure is revealing something you need to eliminate. A belief that's not serving you. A strategy that's creating drag. A commitment that's dividing your focus. A habit that's consuming energy without producing results. The question isn't, what do I need to add to make this work? The question is, what does this failure reveal that I need to remove? There's a guy named James who used this principle to completely rebuild his life. He was running 3 businesses simultaneously and all 3 were mediocre. He was exhausted, stretched thin, unable to give any of them the focus they needed. And every time one of them struggled, his instinct was to add more. More marketing, more staff, more products, more hours. He was operating on the assumption that success required addition. Then he had a series of failures that nearly bankrupted him. 2 major clients left. A product launch flopped. A key employee quit. And instead of his usual response of adding more effort, he tried Musashi's approach. He asked, "What is this failure telling me to eliminate?" And the answer was obvious once he stopped trying to avoid it. He was running 3 businesses and doing all of them poorly. Failure was telling him to eliminate 2 of them. So he did. He shut down 2 businesses, absorbed the losses, and directed all his energy into the one that had the most potential. And within 18 months, that one business had grown larger than all 3 combined had ever been. Not because he added more effort, but because he'd eliminated the drag. He'd removed everything that was dividing his focus and preventing excellence. Failure had shown him that his complexity was killing him, and elimination saved him. Here's how you implement this 3rd shift. Look at your most recent significant failure and ask these questions. What was I trying to do that I didn't need to do? What complexity did I add that made this harder than it needed to be? What commitment or obligation or element was consuming energy without contributing to the core objective? What belief or assumption was wrong that I need to eliminate?
Write those down.
Then actually eliminate them. Don't fix them, don't improve them, don't try to make them work better. Remove them completely. If failure revealed that you're trying to serve too many audiences, eliminate all but one. If failure revealed that you're using strategies that don't align with your strengths, eliminate those strategies. If failure revealed that you're maintaining relationships that drain you, eliminate those relationships. Use failure as permission to simplify ruthlessly. Because what most people don't understand is that success isn't built by doing more things adequately. It's built by doing fewer things excellently. And failure is the mechanism that shows you which things to eliminate so you can focus your full power on what remains.
So here's what everything comes down to.
If you're weak, if your identity depends on never failing, if you interpret every setback as confirmation of your inadequacy, then failure is your only option. Because you've locked yourself out of the learning process that creates capability. You can't grow without failing, and you can't fail without your identity collapsing, so you're stuck. But if you implement these 3 shifts, if you separate warrior from battle so failure stops being about who you are, if you treasure failure as information instead of treating it as judgment, if you use failure as elimination to simplify and refine your approach, then failure stops being your prison and becomes your path. It becomes the mechanism through which you evolve from who you are into who you're capable of becoming. That's what Musashi did. He failed more than almost anyone in history. He just refused to make those failures mean anything about his worth. He extracted the lesson, eliminated the weakness, and moved forward. And by the end of his life, he was undefeated not because he never failed, but because he'd learned from failure so many times that all his weaknesses had been eliminated. You have a choice right now. You can keep interpreting failure as evidence that you're not good enough, and you can stay exactly where you are forever, slowly accumulating resentment and regret. Or you can rebuild your relationship with failure, implement these 3 shifts, and use every setback as information that moves you forward. The second path isn't easier. It requires confronting things about yourself that are uncomfortable. It requires deliberate exposure to situations where you might fail. It requires the ego strength to extract lessons without making them mean you're inadequate. But it's the only path that leads somewhere different from where you are now. So choose. Stay weak and make failure inevitable. Or use failure as the tool that forges strength. Subscribe to this channel right now if you're choosing the second path. Turn on that notification bell because every video I release is designed to give you one more tool for building capability through reality instead of avoiding reality.
And then do one final thing.
Go to the comments and complete this sentence. The failure I've been avoiding examining is, and then say, the lesson it's trying to teach me is. Be specific. Be honest. Because naming what you've been running from is the first step to learning from it. And learning from it is the first step to making sure that specific type of failure never happens again. Do it now. Face the failure you've been turning into identity judgment and extract the tactical lesson instead. That's the work. That's how you transform failure from evidence of weakness into proof of growth. I'll see you in the next video. Now go fail forward instead of failing in place.